and you're happy about it.
So this morning we're going to go and wrap up our lesson from last week. We were talking about gender, and then we'll jump into talking about marriage. If this is your first time joining us for this series, it's a series on marriage and family ethics, which is basically studying what the Bible teaches about the family and right and wrong in the family. And it's been really a delight to go through the first part of this series. And a lot of this is review from some of the lessons I've done. But starting next week, we'll get into stuff that's completely new that I haven't done. Also, apologize for the voice and not being as vibrant. I've caught a cold, so please forgive me, and I'll do my best.
Well, you're forgiven.
Yeah, that was. Any announcements for the good of the order before we jump in?
How was the party last night?
It was great. The Valentine's Day banquet. Yeah, we had a really good time. We had a lot of people show up, and yeah, that's probably one of the reasons I'm not feeling the best. Yeah, it was too much fun. So, yeah, it was really good. And we had several church families that came, and that was really nice. The Arthurs earlier had donated a flat screen TV that was raffled off. And there was all sorts of prizes that were raffled off. So, yeah, it was a really good time. All right. So last week we talked about gender, or I think an older, a more common use of the term would be sex, but that's kind of changed its meaning nowadays. But anyway, we're talking about male and female last week. You may or may not have your notes from last week. I'm on the back page if you do have them. It looks like this. The back page says, should Christians use preferred pronouns? So again, if you don't have the context, basically what we were talking about is gender and transgenderism as being the world's view of gender. And so this is kind of wrapping up that discussion. We'll jump into marriage. So this is not on the note sheet that's new. Okay. So if you're like, where is that? It's on last week's note sheet. So you can just refer to the screen up here. But I kind of wanted to just to kind of review a couple things about gender and about sex that, and again, when I use the word sex, I'm talking male and female, not the act. Just before we jump into talking about whether we should use people's preferred pronouns, and I'll even define what I mean by that, because some people might not understand what that means. But basically, we learn that from the Bible that God makes two sexes. He has made two sexes, two kinds of humans. We don't get our identity solely from, part of it's being male and being female, but we get our identity ultimately from Christ, and that male and female does not dictate eternity in any way, but ultimately our identity is in Christ. But male and female does have to do with who we are. It is part of our identity, especially in our vocations. And so males have a different set of vocations that God has laid before them, as have females have a different set of vocations that God has laid before them, such as mother, wife, sister, daughter. Those would be some of the female vocations. And then obviously, contrary to that would be husband, father, etc. for male. We also learned that our souls and our bodies are not separated. Okay, so if your body actually gives kind of limits your soul and what God has designed your soul for. And how that plays out is, if in your soul you feel like a little, if you're a guy and you feel more feminine, and you feel like, well, maybe I'm actually a girl, how can you test that? how can you test whether you actually are a girl or not?
Go to the bathroom.
Yeah, you can right? Go to the bathroom. Yeah. And because now, but that's not transgender philosophy. They say, well, if you feel like a girl, you feel like you really are a girl, your body, you can manipulate your body to reflect your soul. Okay? But that's not true. Your soul is a male soul, and how do you know your body's a male body? Okay? And they're connected. They're connected. So, go ahead. Yeah, kind of a hermaphrodite. Yeah, so basically, most of the time when there's, well, the first thing we say about that, if there's multiple parts to one person, the first thing you say about that is not part of God's design. So because that is a consequence of sin. Okay, so automatically that's where we start. We don't have to go down the road of saying, well, that is part of God's design. Now there are going to be some things you have to work through, for sure. And then, but most of the time with those situations, first of all, they're extremely rare. Second of all, you usually can tell which one is dominant, and then you can get a DNA test. Because DNA does dictate male and female. So you don't even need a perfect representation of your genitalia to understand I'm male or I'm female at the very end. So, and then you could say, okay, what about XXY chromosomes? Honestly, I haven't looked into it enough. So if someone's kind of looked into where the chromosomes are, I don't really know. But it's not a good argument to say that person is therefore designed to be a man or designed to be a woman based on feelings, because it's against God's design. One, it's usually predominantly, like you can see, predominantly the chromosomes. And then, yeah, the fourth exception, sort of do that with your path. Yeah.
What if a calf is born with 2 heads?
Come on.
I don't want to go into the ethics of that. I don't think that applies to humans. Okay.
It applies to the physical, genetic corruption of sin, by sin and how it affects the entire world.
Right. Yeah. I just don't want people to think like, oh, if I have said I can join twins. No, that's just, yeah. Anyway, yeah,
Josh, from what I've read, this is where Satan really got a hold of this whole transgender.
Yeah.
Because people blame God for the imperfectionism.
Right.
And it's man's sinful nature that's created imperfect. So it was an easy route for him to infiltrate, and that's where this really gained a lot of traction.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it does always center on the self is made God in order to make those types of decisions. People feel like they make those types of decisions. Well, I'm God, basically. They don't say that, but they act like it.
But they want somebody to blame, so they blame God because they haven't read the scripture.
And then they put themselves in this. Right. So, if at all possible, let's try to keep going here because this is still last week. And this is just review. But let's go ahead and go to this question: should Christians use preferred pronouns? I'm going to take there is going to be a black and white line I take in here, theoretically, and then as things carry out into the practice of daily life, sometimes daily life is more gray than you talk about and clarify in the classroom. So I'll try to give some of the black and whites, and then if there is any gray, it's not the time to bring up personal family situations in class. That's a conversation you have with Pastor Brandt. And he's got all the answers. Yeah. There you go. I can just kick it. It's great being a vicar. I can be like, well, Pastor Paul's approved it. I'm not your pastor. And go talk to Pastor Brandt. Go ahead and open to 1 Corinthians 10. This is not a passage about gender, but I think it does have some helpful things how we speak about gender. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 23 through 33. If you do have a Bible, open it up. If you don't, it's going to be up here. Yeah. Bring it next time. And just for good order, someone raise his or her hand to offer to repeat that. Okay, Chuck.
All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the ground of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If one of the unbelievers invites you to dinner and you are disposed to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But if someone says to you, "This has been offered in sacrifice," then do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informs you, for the sake of conscience. I do not mean your conscience, but his. For why should my liberty be determined by someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of that for which I give thanks? So whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many that may be saved.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go through this passage, and then I'm going to give you a couple situations when it comes to gender and how we talk about gender. But before we come back to the passage, let me just kind of explain what preferred pronouns are. This might be a new concept for many of you. So in transgender philosophy, because people who struggle with this think that they're the opposite sex or want to be the opposite sex or whatever, they ask the people around them to refer to him or her as their preferred sex, not their actual sex, their preferred sex. So if I thought I was a girl, maybe I started dressing like a girl, maybe I started taking hormones that would help me talk like a girl, etc., and there's more intense surgeries too. Not only do I do that for myself, but I also ask all of you, I'm she now, and maybe I'll go by Jocelyn instead of Josh or something like that. So, so that's what I mean when I say preferred pronoun. It's not the God-given pronoun per se that I've been given. I've been given the pronoun he, okay, not she. So, I know that's a weird concept. If that just kind of sounds weird, that's okay. It's very weird. Okay, quick comments because we are trying to go quicker today. Yes, sir.
Can you elaborate a little more? Because that's just not opposite sex anymore. Oh,
Yeah.
That is like,
yeah, I don't know if we need to. Yeah. So there is. So people will say there's I don't know how many genders or whatever.
Too many.
But I don't know if we have to go down the details other than
there is.
what Dave said. Other than there is. There's a bunch of different things that people will say. You need to call him or her. It's different than what God gave him or her.
The biggest one now is non-binary.
Yeah.
That's like 40% of it
Yeah.
is now
Yeah.
non-binary.
So don't refer to me as he or she, but refer to me as they, which also doesn't make sense grammatically because that's a plural. So, but I don't know, maybe because
Multiple personalities.
yeah, I was going to make a worse comment after. I'm hesitant, Steve, because I want to keep going to this verse. Go ahead.
If someone invites you to share in their insanity, you cannot be compelled to do it.
Okay.
Now, I would
Yeah.
try to respond as kind as I possibly can, maybe like you,
Yeah.
or whatever,
So,
but not sharing it if I have an opportunity not to do it. Maybe
Okay.
address them by their last name.
okay. So that's where I'm actually getting in this. Okay, so this passage, there's seats up here, Alversons. Come on up. Don't be shy. want to go to dinner with an unbeliever, are you allowed to? Yes, go. But if he sets in front of you food sacrificed to an idol, and he says, this was sacrificed to an idol, should you eat it? The answer is no. And he says that. He said you should not eat it. Okay? It's not just up to you. Okay? It was up to you if he doesn't say anything. But if he says, this food is sacrificed to an idol, you can't eat it. And he says, not because it's a sin to eat food sacrificed to idols. That's in your conscience. You can eat food sacrificed to idols to the glory of God. The reason you don't eat that food sacrificed to an idol is because of the server, the host, who made it about idol worship. Okay? And so as soon as he makes it about idol worship, even if you privately in your head know it's not idol worship, the public message has to be truth. So you can't appear as being an idol worshiper, or you can't help him in his idol worship. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So you're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for him. Okay? That's why he says, why is my liberty judged by another's? It doesn't have to be, but for his conscience. Not of your own, but that of the other. You don't want his conscience to be defiled, meaning you don't want him to partake in idol worship, and you don't want him to think that Christians are okay worshiping other gods. Okay? So this is a really confusing passage if you're just kind of like reading it for devotions without that framework of what idol worship is to them. Okay, so now I'm going to apply this to transgenderism and how we speak about it. Okay, so if so I have, friends in college. We had all sorts of nicknames for each other. I don't know why, but okay. Sometimes if you are joking around, let's say I did something that was more feminine or something. Okay. And one of the guys was like, "Okay, Jocelyn," teasing me. Okay. Now, is that okay? Yes, it is. Okay, the reason why is because I know he knows I'm a guy, and I know I'm a guy, and he's teasing me. Okay? Okay. Now, what if I tell him and I say, okay, guys that I lived with in my house in college, I'm actually a girl. Okay? And from now on, I'm gonna start acting like a girl, and you guys need to call me Jocelyn instead of Josh. Can my friend, if I do something that's a little feminine, say, okay, Jocelyn? No. But it was okay before.
Right.
Why? Why is it not okay now? Because
And you lost your eye.
Yeah, you guys are right. Because I have made the word Jocelyn to basically be my identity, to be sin, to be basically agreeing with against God's design. Okay? Even though before, when he was teasing me, it's like, okay, Jocelyn, or whatever. This is a weird example, but you guys get the point. So if a transgender person is making pronouns about his or her identity and making it about sin, then the Christian is obligated to keep the public picture as truth. Okay? So a lot of Christians will say, and again, I'm not sure this applies with the person that you see, like, you're, I almost said gas. We had this at work. You like the person, the cashier at Fred Meyer or whatever. Okay. If you're like not really sure what his or her gender is, I don't necessarily know this applies in this situation. Okay, because you don't necessarily actually know all the time what the person actually is, unless they tell you. And so, can you use preferred pronouns there? I mean, you don't really know what the truth is, so I'm not going to necessarily comment on a situation like that. I'm talking about a situation where you know the truth, Maybe you grew up with this person. Maybe you're family with this person. You're friends with this person. You know this person's the sex of this person, and this person is demanding you to participate in a lie that goes contrary to God's design. That's my argument. That's when you are required to at least have your public portrayal about who that person is be in agreement with God and not in agreement with insanity or sin or whatever your word. So, comments, questions about that? There's a lot. So, please don't bring up any particular examples. Yeah, go ahead.
You know when that's really hard, Josh, is for school teachers and bus drivers.
Yeah, so
I mean,
that's a
it's
really
kind
good
of like
point.
when they told us we couldn't say Merry Christmas, we had to say Happy Holiday.
Sure.
So that was
Yeah.
kind of like borderline, but you had to do it.
Yeah.
But now, if you don't go along, in fact, they even have classes for teachers. If you
Yeah.
don't go along with the he-she thing or whatever, you can lose your job.
Yeah. Yep. If there's particular situations, you need to talk to your pastor about that. But the short and black and white answer is we have to serve God rather than man. And the ways that persecution happens to Christians in the past has not always been because we believe that Jesus is resurrected from the dead, and so we're just like sent to the arena to get eaten by lions. Oftentimes it starts with you agree with some different social issue, and so we're actually not going to support your businesses, and you're just going to be poor because you're Christian. And so I think that's clearly happening now. I mean, if you don't know that's happening, it's happening. Know that it's happening. And Christians are suffering for speaking God's design. And it's not just like their faith in Jesus Christ. Like people say, oh, you can believe in Jesus. You just have to be nice and use the language that this person wants you to use. But when you're speaking, you are, affirming something that's contrary to nature, God's nature, and His design. So, again, particulars, talk to a pastor, because I'm not going to, I don't know. But I think that was a really good point. Okay, other hands. Okay, I think the order was Torsman, Steve, Jay, and Linda.
Just a quick comment on that same passage. Both church membership and post-communion are the same kind of thing. If people believe different things, they shouldn't be church members. Or if they believe different things about communion, they shouldn't be communion. Just kind of thing.
Could be, yeah. Yeah, I think more about that. Yeah, go ahead,
You
Steve.
said brought up school bus drivers.
Yeah.
I is one. Anyway, it's very difficult to compel speech. In other words, sometimes the best answer is silence.
The best answer is silent?
And I've had millions of conversations with people of more than
Nope. Yeah.
more than one, I'm not talking about specifics,
Okay.
just strangers, more than one gender, and it doesn't take a lot of creativity to never bring the topic up, or even, you can talk to a person all day long and not talk about him or her or whatever, just talk to them face to face.
Yeah. Yeah, so this may come across as harsh, so feel free to disagree with the vicar. But the danger of silence, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing, I think you're cultivating a relationship with these people, but the danger of silence is the same danger that Paul is trying to avoid here. So if somebody serves you food that's sacrificed to idols, and you don't bring it up, what are you participating in? You're silent, but you're participating in what? In idol worship, in his evil.
That is not my meaning of silence.
Okay.
My meaning of silence is when someone compels you to speak in their favor. You cannot be compelled. So in other words, between the communication understood what is being done.
Right.
That doesn't mean they can force you to do it.
Right. Yeah, right. Good. Yeah. And the biggest point is is this person knows your position on his gender. That's the point.
Yeah,
I'm not saying you have to be
I'm
like
not trying to be silent.
he, you know, like just to rub it in, but the public, like the public understanding of what you believe and what you're standing for has to be God's truth and not man's selfish.
And quickly, there is an alternative. You can speak what you believe. Just as they try to compel you to do it,
Yeah.
you can reinforce the fact. Do you want me to go against my beliefs to satisfy your beliefs? Is that what you're telling me to do? How is that any, if that's unfair, then how is it unfair just for you, but not for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just be prepared to be like really not like.
So if I get into Fred's house in Seattle, he was my best man, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get into details. Okay, his daughter, I'm not giving names, you don't know who it is. His daughter has gone over to the dark side, I'll leave it at that. And they asked me, you know, it says, well, and they're trying to support that position, I says, and some people have a problem with it, and I said immediately in their house, I have a huge problem with it. And her response to me was, yeah, but at least you're nice about it. And what am I going to do in her house? Bring up a topic and rub her nose in it when it's her offspring? Never would do that. Never, ever. But if I was in a public arena and my friend was being attacked or I was being attacked, I will go to my own defense or their defense if I have the opportunity. So the setting has a lot to do with it. You're in a person's house having dinner with them. How you treat them there may be different than McDonald's or someplace.
Okay, quick comment, Jay, and then we're gonna move on. Or Linda had a comment.
My comment is just if it's someone in your family, that you have a close relationship, you just not talk about it, or I mean, you don't cut them off.
Yeah, that's my point. So if you don't talk about it to the point where they think that you are okay with it, that's what I'm saying we should avoid. I'm not saying you have to bring it up every time you're around the person, but the public understanding of what you believe and how you're going to refer to that person can't be with their sin.
And even with our kids that have friends that are gay, they know that we don't approve of that lifestyle.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I'm going to shun them and never be around them.
Sure. Yeah. That's why Paul says you're allowed to go to dinner. You know, but the public, what do you believe needs to be with the truth?
I would say in a situation like that, I would not use their pronouns because I refuse to participate in or encourage their delusions, unless there's a lawsuit hanging around. Because these people sue you when you use wrong pronouns. In which case, I'm not going to deal with you at all. Go away.
Well, again, so I'm trying to clarify here. Sometimes the not using pronouns is fine, but Paul is giving an example where he's saying silence is participating in the person's, is defiling the person's conscience. And that is what I think the temptation for Christians is that to speak neutrally about them actually can still allow them to kind of go along with it. And I'm trying to encourage a boldness that God is going to reward you for your truth and not your silence. That makes sense.
But even if he doesn't reward you, do it anyway.
Well, yeah, I don't know if he's going to reward you in 5 minutes, but in eternity at least.
Well,
So, Bonnie. Okay.
So to what Linda was saying, I think the biggest issue is we need to be proactive rather than reactive. If we've been talking about this for years, our kids already know. My kids already know. They know what I'm going to do if they go that direction. They already know because I've talked to them. And I think that's the biggest thing. We can't react to this. We need to be proactive.
So one of the things I've read and heard is that we need to remember that we are created in God's image as man and woman. God does not make mistakes. So if we feel that we are attracted to the opposite sex or the same sex, or if we're trapped in the wrong body, that is not a mistake by God. That is the sin. And we are beautiful as God created us, because God created us perfect in what we are. And so there's, it's not necessarily denying that those feelings are present. It's identifying that those are there, but those aren't the way that God created us.
Right.
Okay, this is real important. I've had
We
this
know,
conversation at McDonald's.
You
with
know.
an unbeliever. You cannot leave out the fall of man. You cannot leave that out. We were created in God's image, but that image was corrupted by the fall. And we are not the same as He created Adam and Eve. Before the fall.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Don't think I missed anybody.
Miss Paul. Don't look up.
Okay.
Josh. Miss Paul.
That concludes our study of gender.
Has one.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Is it okay to counter? We're gonna agree to disagree on it.
Yes, that's my point. Yeah, that's my point. Yeah, that's exactly my point. So,
And deflect the conversation.
could be, yeah, but the person understands your position on it. Yeah, then yes, that's totally fine. Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying there's never situations ever where you don't, just.
It isn't gonna be, that's not gonna be a conversation just casual in McDonald's.
Yeah.
You're in a more established relationship with that individual. And really open up.
Yeah, but the public understanding of your position on his gender or her gender is with God, not him. Yep, good. Okay, so we'll probably spend the next two defining marriage and talking about the purpose of marriage and talking about what the Bible teaches on divorce and remarriage. And so that's your notes. Does everyone have a note handout? Raise your hand if you don't, and Linda, maybe you can pass them out. So the goal for this lesson on marriage is threefold. It's to understand what marriage is, okay, to define it according to the Scripture, to understand what it's for, what its purpose or purposes are, and then thirdly, it's to understand the Bible's teaching on divorce and remarriage. And I specifically mention remarriage because sometimes that gets kind of left out. Oftentimes we talk about what does the Bible teach on divorce, but we don't really think about what does the Bible teach on remarriage. And it does both do matter. The reason why we need to, a lot of times, so this is really important because a lot of times Christians will talk about marriage in terms of practice. How should you work through a conflict with your spouse? How should you discipline your children? And those are all necessary and really important life things that matter. But the reason why I'm not just jumping there first is because sometimes people have those conversations before they even define what it is and what it's for. And if you define what it is and what it's for, that can help out clear up a lot of the practical stuff. How do you work through conflict? Well, if you understand what marriage is, what it's for, and then how it functions, that's already kind of a framework a little bit on how to work through conflict a little bit. So that's why it's important to kind of define these things from the beginning. So let me just do a brief. There's going to just be a lot of scripture today, just going through as fast as we can. So, but before we get there, the world on marriage. So I just kind of had two different definitions of marriage according to the world. The first one is basically marriage is a public union of two people. So if that sounds broad, it should. That's how a lot of people define, how the world kind of defines marriage. very broad. Okay, this could be two men. This could be, you know, and they would probably say adults because, you know, it's not really popular in our culture to be okay with otherwise. But adults, but other than that, like basically just kind of a union. And yeah, that sounds broad because it is. The more recent one. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the more recent one. Before, if you go like maybe 20 years ago, it would be a contractual union between a man and a woman. So a little bit more specific. Okay. And they would say maybe like there's a commitment there in the contract. And they would define it between a man and a woman about 20 years ago. Obviously now today, that's not how it's defined. And I'm going to kind of go even a step further back from that. Okay, so my definition of marriage is not going to be a contract between a man and a woman. It's going to be, I mean that's part of it, but it's going to be more than that. It's going to be more specific. So let's go ahead and just jump to the first marriage, Genesis chapter 2. Starting in verse 21. And really this is just kind of the creation of marriage, and so we'll just kind of read through this. I'm not going to make a ton of comments on this, but the next two verses I will make comments on, and then I'll allow you guys to comment. So go ahead and read that. I'll take a hand. Go ahead.
So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh, and the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.
Okay. So we're going to use some New Testament passages to interpret this passage. So if you can maybe bookmark it, that might be helpful. The next passage is going to be Matthew 19. Jesus teaches on divorce. Matthew 19, 3 through 4. No, it's Matthew 19, but we're going to read more than 3 to 4. We're going to read 3 through 9. Volunteer, please.
The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? He answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. They say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you, and put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery.
And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery.
Okay. I'd like to just kind of focus on that first part, verses 4 through 6, before we get to his comments on Moses. Here's my main question. What is the cause of marriage? God. Okay. God is the cause of marriage. So this is where my definition of marriage derails from our society's definition from 20 years ago, which says it's a contract between a man and a woman. Who's missing? God. Okay. So, and we don't think about it because in our culture, we basically think of marriage as something you choose to do, and then you promise to do, and it all kind of centers in what you've committed. But the commitment is only important because it's connected to God bringing you two together. So why do you commit to stay with your spouse? Because God has brought you together. And if you leave, yes, you're breaking a promise, but what are you also doing? You're separating God's union that He's created. Okay? You're not just breaking a promise. Like, it's one thing if I say, okay, I promise to do something, and then I don't do it. I'm making myself a liar. But if God brings me and Allie into marriage, and then I leave, who am I making a liar? God. Not just myself. Okay. I think if we understood that this is the reason, the undoing of marriage is the undoing of God's work, I think Christians would be more hesitant to divorce. Because oftentimes we think, well, if I married someone and the person is just so not good or something like that, like you just start to think of this person, and sometimes people will be like, this person's just evil. Okay? If marriage is built in, if marriage is caused by you, then you might think, I made a mistake. I married the wrong person. But where is that thinking wrong? Yeah. Like, you didn't marry yes, maybe you were foolish in choosing a spouse. There is truth. But who actually performed the marriage and brought you guys together? God. So if you're going to break apart that marriage, you're breaking it apart because of your own reason, because of your mistakes, but really you're forgetting that God's the one that brought you together. And that you're reversing something He did, which that's one of the reasons why it's wrong. So.
Well, but the outside influences in the world, you can marry someone and on that day, maybe the first year, 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, everything's wonderful and in that union, but then all of a sudden, at work or somewhere, say it's a guy, meets a group of people and starts going down after work and hanging out, starts drinking. Little did he know that he shouldn't drink because he's going to become an alcoholic. And then in the whole thing, as the world progressed to where we are now in society, drugs get mixed in there too. And people can totally change who you bound with God on the day you married because of things like drug and alcohol. That is not the same person that you married. So in that case, talking to a pastor, a friend of mine, the pastor said, if it's not the same person, they have, and one of the reasons for divorce is abandonment. Well, someone that totally changes from drugs, alcohol, who they hang out with and whatever, in this pastor's words, it would be an example of abandoning that union because that person had changed so drastically, and probably it could be said mind, body, and soul.
Okay. We'll look at the exceptions for when divorce is acceptable. We'll look at those, and one of them I mentioned here.
Was that pastor right, or was he wrong?
So, yeah, again, we'll get there. This is jumping ahead a little bit. So abandonment's not a word in Scripture that's given as an exception for grounds for divorce. That's kind of a potentially a natural law argument of like, okay, that's he's kind of separating from divorce,
Right.
or sorry, separating from the marriage.
And the other.
So I'm not gonna, and I don't like. This is why I don't like to deal with personal examples. It's like I don't. It's like whatever I say is like it's a lose-lose. So the scripturally mandated exceptions to divorce is wrong and shouldn't be done is sexual immorality or fornication, which is basically adultery. So, and I don't even know if that was involved or whatnot. That's not my business. But and there is a difference between divorce and divorce and remarriage, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay? So just kind of hold the question a little bit because they are different. So, yeah.
Is this being taught during our premarital counseling time? I remember when during my premarital counseling, it took maybe 10 minutes, and that was it. It was no big deal. But I think that this is something that we should be teaching our kids before they get married.
Yeah, I'm teaching it to fifth graders.
Yeah.
But, and I think that's kind of the earliest. Clear, unless you're a parent. I'm not their parent, so fifth grade is not the earliest. But yeah, I think it should be a part of. It was part of our marriage counseling. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it should be. Yeah. Okay. So the first part of the definition of marriage is God is the one who performs it. Okay. Or it's a divinely established. Let's go ahead and go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 15 through 17. And we defined this last time. I taught on marriage, but we're going to ask the question, what is the one flesh union? Because in Genesis 2, you'll notice the word marriage is never used. You stay at 1 Corinthians, I'm just going to flip back to Genesis. It says, right here, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The word marriage is not, as far as the word marriage isn't in there. Okay. But this union is, they shall become one flesh. So marriage is a one flesh union. That's the definition. Now what is the one flesh union? We learned that from 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Volunteer to read that. And this will be the last verse we go through. Steve, go ahead. Yeah, that's it.
Do you not know that the difference between voluntary and
Oh, I'm sorry. It does start with the you not.
which verse?
Verse 15.
Okay. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. But he who unites himself with the Lord is one with him in spirit.
All right, thank you. So, what is the one flesh union? Don't be shy.
The physical consummation of the marriage vows.
Yeah. Jay, is that what you're going to say?
No, I think the one flesh means if they have a child, that's really one flesh of the two parents.
That would be a consequence or result of the one flesh union. But the one flesh union here, even if the prostitute doesn't get pregnant, you're having a one flesh union with the prostitute if you are having sex with her. So like, it's kind of, it's not clarified. Paul's really good at clarifying some of the Hebrew way of saying things. But here, it's really kind of tame. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and be joined to his wife. Or in some passages it says, hold fast. That's sex. Okay? That's what that's referring to. And in the consummation, that's why we call it the consummation of a marriage. Because that's kind of the final culmination of what marriage is. It doesn't just happen at the altar where the pastor marries you. That's kind of the divine word coming through the voice of the pastor or the voice of the judge saying, these two are united, and then they go and be united later. But it's not just like, there's both aspects of that. Okay. Are there exceptions to this? I know of some weird, there's some weird church fathers who were encourage these contractual marriages that were non-sexual, but that's weird. And I don't know, I haven't studied that enough to say whether that's actually a marriage or not, but this is the biblical way that defines the one flesh union is the second. Because otherwise, Paul couldn't say this in 1 Corinthians. He couldn't say that when you're joined to a harlot, you become one flesh with her. Because that's what you're basically functionally, not God's marriage, but the essence of what marriage is, that's what you're participating in with a prostitute when you have sex with her.
And God doesn't explain.
What do you mean?
He doesn't explain what's happening. There's something spiritual going on.
Oh, yeah, there's something. Yeah, there is a spiritual component there.
So what? So in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between concubines and having several wives? What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. So I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but yeah, there's.
I realize it was the cultural time.
Yeah.
And so forth.
Yeah, but we don't want to necessarily jump there because God does take things that are culturally normal and He basically just abolishes them in the Ten Commandments. So I mean, God can abolish whatever He wants whenever He wants. But I mean, one argument is this is a weird church father, and I don't know who says this, but I think it's Chrysostom where he says, "Oh yeah, God allowed that because He wanted to populate the earth." So I think there's a clear. Pastor Brandt's like, dude, why did you do this? But the New Testament, okay, but the New Testament is very clear, and Christ is very clear that even with divorce, like it says, God suffered and Moses suffered the Israelites to get divorced because of the hardness of their hearts. That could be another answer, so that he allowed for polygamous marriage because of the hardness of their hearts. So that could be another one. But I will say it's easy for us because we have clarity of the entire scriptures to be like, well, that's not okay now. But was it okay? Was it not back then? I don't necessarily want to make it.
I think the cultural thing has a lot to do with it. But if you go back to Genesis, it was one woman that He created.
And that's what Christ.
If you look at that story of the creation, where you started the verses, if you go back a little bit and see how God actually created Adam before Eve, and then He did something between that. He paraded animals in front.
Yeah.
There were two reasons for it. Adam got to name the animals, but the other reason was to find a suitable helper.
Yeah, exactly.
And Adam never found a suitable helper in those animals.
Yeah.
Because God was saying, I'm going to make it, here it comes.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Another important point about Genesis 2, then we'll have to be done, is Adam is one flesh when he's created. He's from his one flesh, he's created into two fleshes, and then what happens in marriage? He becomes one flesh again. So you start with one, God creates two, and then He ends with one. Okay, and that's the reason why it's called the one flesh union, is because Eve was from Adam's flesh. And He even says it, He's like, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Sir?
If you look at the plural marriages, none of them end well.
All right, there we go.
know, God tolerates sin. If he didn't, none of us would be here. And one time his tolerance of it was overcome to the point that he destroyed the world. He was his own creation and wanted to save the people. So the thing is, just because God tolerates sin, he never condones sin. And he never takes away the judgment. In fact, he put that judgment on himself.
Right. So I'm gonna clarify one thing before we leave, and then we'll jump into this next week. But actually, no, we'll just.
He's like, no, I can't make this.
I realize it's gonna take a while. All right, let's go ahead and bow our heads and join me in the Lord's Prayer. We pray, Our Father, who art in heaven,